So welcome everyone to this session. I'm holding this. It feels a bit formal to be standing at a lectern, and this is a very different room to the one that I did the session in this morning, where we all sort of sat around quite cosily. So yeah, that would be nicer. Just let's gather. It just. I really, because it's quite an interactive session, it would be nicer if you were a bit nearer. Thank you. As you're saying, it's not like church where they're just because I'm hoping that the time that we're going to spend, I know it's the end of the day and we're all a bit sort of a bit weary, but I'm hoping that it will be an interactive workshop that, that's what a workshop's for, isn't it? So it's learning along the way. Hopefully everything's working okay with that, Mark. That's great. So chaplaincy and palliative care. Just out of interest, is this a focus that people have currently? Is this how many people sort of have experience of regular palliative care in your work? Okay. And hospice? Not in a hospice, but in an acute setting. Okay. So one of the things that came out this morning in our conversations was that while lots of what I say is applicable to an acute setting, it's the particular focus for our conversation is in a palliative care institution, and so it does change things a little. So we'll see where we go, but hopefully it'll be right. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Sure. There'll be a lot of overlap, but the specifics about the way we approach chaplaincy and spiritual care in hospices, it is different because they're different organisations, but we'll see where we go. So it's helpful to know just what your experience is and your focus. So a little bit about myself first of all. I'm Karen Murphy. I'm a Methodist minister by background. I started, I did 18 years in circuit ministry, but in 1999, one of my church members was on the trustee board of our local hospice and said, well, so we've got an Anglican, we've got a Catholic, we haven't got anybody sort of free church, so how about it? Well, I went along and had a look at the hospice, and it was a Sue Ryder hospice just in South Bedford, and they took me on as a volunteer once on a Thursday afternoon with no training, no experience, just come along and see, just wander about, which I did. And what I found was that Thursday afternoons became for me the highlight of my week in a strange kind of way. Who would have thought it? I was quite happy as a circuit minister doing this, that and the other, but that afternoon became really important to me. I had a sabbatical in the year 2000 and did sort of 3 months more intensive investigation into what this hospice did and spent more time there. And they offered me a 12-hour part-time post alongside my ministry. And I just felt as if, I'd come home, I fitted, surprise, surprise. Who would have thought death and dying was where I would then start working for a long, long time. In 2005, a full-time post came up in sunny old Weston-super-Mare in Somerset, and that's where I've been ever since, and still am. So that's a bit about my background. So I've been around palliative care for a long time. I've been president of our association, been on various sort of groups and committees that have shaped a lot of the way that palliative care is formed now, and really proud of how far we've come, because it's unrecognisable from 20 years ago. So that's a little bit of background about me, and what I'm hoping to share is some of that experience, but also to draw on yours as we go through the conversation. I haven't got a watch, so I'm just going to sneakily get my phone so I can just keep an eye on the time. So, next slide, please, Mark. So what do palliative care chaplains do? Not as an exhaustive list by a long chalk. And what we found this morning as we looked at that list was to think about the similarities. People in acute hospitals were saying, well, that's what I do. And yeah, it is indeed. But let's look at it specifically from a palliative care point of view. We listen to existential questions. And what does that mean? It means all sorts of things to different people, and it will mean individual things to people who are suddenly asking these big questions of themselves. We all do it, but we don't necessarily do it routinely until we need to. So questions like, who am I? What do I believe in? What do I hope in? What do I trust in? How do I make sense of this? These big questions that when mortality is facing us very starkly, we suddenly have to address. And it's unfamiliar. So we support people experiencing unfamiliar emotions. I was speaking about this morning with the group, and we just recognised that a lot of us had experience of these unfamiliar emotions ourselves and the big questions ourselves, and that really helps them when we're faced with them, when patients ask them. We help people articulate what I call the unspeakable things, those things that are hard to articulate and perhaps we've never spoken about and haven't got the language to speak about them. And I'm not sure what I'm saying is that we then put words into people's mouths, but this idea of unspeakable things, the things that people seek forgiveness for, seek reconciliation about, and you'll all have had encounters with people who suddenly say, I need to speak about this to someone before I die. And we'll all have many, many examples of that. For me, one was a patient I'd known coming to day hospice for a number of weeks, and was very clearly and openly someone saying, I'm not religious, I don't want anything to do with that, or with that stuff. But one day he sought me out, and he said, I need to speak to you. And we sat in the chapel, which he was happy to do, and he needed to speak about his experience of serving in the Falklands War. And he'd carried with him, I mean, that's going back many years now, isn't it, to the early 80s, and he needed to speak about an event that happened on board his ship. And someone was killed, and in his mind it should have been him, because he swapped shifts, and for all those years he'd carried the guilt of it not being him that died. And he'd never spoken about it with his family. But there was always something sitting on his shoulder. And this for him was an example of an unspeakable thing that he needed to speak about in some way before his death. So we help people articulate those things. And then, on a more practical note, we collaborate with the NDT to ensure holistic care gets a mention, and sometimes that's hard work. When I worked in the hospice in Bedford, it was a very medical model, and it was very hard to get your voice heard. You really had to sort of say, please miss, can I say something? It was really hard to sort of get that voice across. Different where I am now, there's very much more support for what we do. To be a visible presence of faith and belief, to be someone representing that part of our care alongside the physical, the social, the emotional, saying spiritual care matters. To facilitate rites and rituals creatively. This is a bit I really love about my work, because there's a freedom in the hospice to be creative, and this is just fabulous. So last Sunday morning, for example, we had a white carriage and white horses arrive at the hospice bearing a patient and her partner for a blessing ceremony. The story was that when her mother died, she very specifically requested that she have a white carriage and horses for her funeral. The patient that I'm dealing with, it's been overridden. That wasn't going to happen. Her siblings sort of said, no, we're not doing that. It's too much money. So she said, I'm jolly well going to have that at my funeral. And then we talked about the possibility of her having a blessing. And she said, I could arrive in a white carriage, couldn't I? And she did. So down Western Seafront they trotted, and it was just wonderful. And that sort of creativity, that thinking that she did herself. I was just a bit of a prompt, really. But to make things like that happen is a great joy. And I shared with the group this morning something that was really quite weird, to be honest. But it was a godparent by proxy event, is the best thing I can describe it as. A patient's nephew's wife had given birth to this little boy and wanted the patient to be a godmother. She had days to live. But somehow, and it was in days before Zoom, somehow we sort of got phones working and pictures, and there's baby on one phone and patient on the other. And somehow across the ether, the intention that had this patient been able to survive, she would have been a godmother to this baby. But it was kind of a weird event, if I'm honest, but something happened, and it felt a creative moment that brought a family some joy. So we do that, don't we? We work with where people are at and what they need, and if we can make these things, whatever they are, happen, we're well placed to do it. And then to be the spiritual face of the hospice. I'm not sure really what that means, but I think it means that they wheel me out at certain events to be that sort of person. But it's much more than that, isn't it? It's being the person who says spiritual care matters in this setting, perhaps more than others, when people are asking the existential questions and we're supporting these unfamiliar emotions. So that's kind of what palliative care chaplains do. It's what you do, but it feels as if it's intensified in this particular area of our work, and you'll know that from your own experience. Anything anybody wants to add to that list? It really isn't exclusive.
I'll articulate this, but I was thinking, I was dealing with somebody who's an older person who lost two of their children and went out of life, and both of them committed suicide, and had a few months in the send-off that would have really supported her husband, and having the opportunity years later to kind of go to the graveside and to keep them just to get public. And it was really, really special in that area where we're struggling with communities, people, that person feeling like they're outside, it's strong for me, it's been a good place, and people being outside because they committed suicide.
Yeah.
That was really good.
Yeah. So kind of having courage to do that. Yeah. Saying without judgment.
So just thinking that's a sort of resolving, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Resolving.
Yeah, we're facilitators of that reconciliation, forgiveness, resolution. Yeah.
You mentioned collaborating with the MPT. You haven't talked about the staff,
No,
about how they feel
Sure.
what's going on
Yeah.
and what your role is there.
absolutely. I mean, it's informally part of my job description, but it's informal. But course, it
Even the
happens.
staff themselves have a role in terms of spiritual care.
Yes, yes, absolutely, yeah. So it's facilitating others to do that, and training and support is part of my role, yeah, absolutely.
It's funny, sorry I'm speaking again, but it's funny you should mention that because I had a situation where a patient was in mental health services, had been there for some weeks, and when I came in the following week, the person had been rushed off to the acute hospital where the staff had known them for so long. And initially, it was kind of, well, they died out of our service.
Yes, yeah.
Sort of attitude, but that's not the point. There are people on this wall that nurse that person for many weeks. But then, and for the family, the husband and his person who died, to know that we really cared about them, and that they were a patient dying in our service, not because they were part of it. It was really important. So it was a form of caring for the staff.
Indeed, no, it's absolutely essential. It is.
Can I ask, I've seen a lot of underlying patients, but the majority of elderly.
Yeah.
Is that the case in your hospital? So, and it is the case in our local hospitals to a great majority, and we also take quite a few patients when there are no beds in the hospital.
Right, okay.
But one of the things that staff and I have struggled with the most is when you have patients and relatives who are in real denial. How do you manage that? I mean, I had a patient 6 months ago in his 50s, 60s, rather than 80s, 90s, who was dying, and his wife was furious. I mean, I've never seen something, I only spent 10 minutes with her, she was so furious. And it had a and apparently I wasn't there to see it happen. So on the day that he died, actually in Leamington rather than the hospice, because I didn't do it, and it was really hard for the staff.
Yeah, it is.
How do you cope with that?
Yeah, we will come on to it. Can I just say that? We'll come on to it because the gist of what I want us to do is really looking at a particular case study, and a lot of these sort of issues of staff support, of denial, will come out of the case study. So if we do, is that okay?
Maybe something like a company, maybe it's more of a summing up than it's something different, but it's something really less, specific, less more people than doing.
Indeed,
But
yeah.
something around that.
Yeah.
Is what we're doing.
Yeah, just, yes, it's the presence idea, isn't it? So next slide, please, Mark. Constantly. So this is our hospice. This is just a few little details about it. We've got 10 inpatient beds. If you know Somerset at all, Western-super-Mare is on the sort of top end of the Bristol Channel. We go to Clevedon, a big semicircle out into the rural areas of Somerset and down sort of underneath Burnham-on-Sea. So it's quite a big catchment area with the urban focus of Weston, which is a growing suburb of Bristol really now, but a lot of rural communities as well. So it's quite a big arc around the town. We have a day hospice facility. Some of you will be familiar with that concept. A day hospice runs for 3 days a week. Patients can be referred to attend for 10 weeks at a time, come and just experience an informal day away from the routine of being at home with a carer or on their own. So while a lot of people who come to that are of an older age group, not exclusively, by a long shot, we have some younger patients who choose to engage. There's access to myself, to complementary therapy, physio, but there's also just the opportunity to be and to do what they need to do that's different from home. It's a really open place where people can just be themselves. So a really good example is a young female patient who was with us for a while, used to arrive on a Wednesday morning wearing a wig that she hated And the first thing she'd do is to rip it off her head and throw it down and say, "Phew, I can take that off my head." But her family needed her to wear it. So it was a representation of the mask that she felt she had to keep in place for family and friends to be fine. Yeah, I'm fine. Oh, okay, I'm coping with this. It's okay. But when she came to day hospice, off the mask came, and it just gave her a break from having to wear that mask each day, every day. So that's what day hospice aims to do, is to normalise where people are at and to help people have conversations, just to be able to talk about things that are real, without judgment, without condition. So there, day hospice. We have 8 community nurse specialists who are attached to GP surgeries, and they each have quite a heavy caseload. As you can see, each year we support around 500 patients in our catchment area, which is, I don't know whether that's high or low, it seems a lot. And about half of those have got some connection with our family support team. So that's chaplaincy, bereavement support, pre-bereavement support, children's work, etc. People have a companion volunteer. So we, as a family support team, of which I'm a part, we are involved with an awful lot of those patients. Outpatient services, complementary therapists, physio. So that's a little snapshot of where we are. We're an independent hospice set up by, we've been going over 30 years now, but initially we started with a group of people meeting to pray. Our foundation was in a local church where a group of people got together to pray about the possibility of establishing a hospice in Weston-super-Mare. And I like every now and again to remind some of our fundraisers about this, because it gets lost in translation. And I noticed on our website recently, when I looked at the history section, there was none of that there. It was just sort of, and here we are. So they have it now. Because it's important. It's important. Whatever that means to people, we had that origin, that beginning. Because a lot of those founding members are still very much around, and their work needs to be recognised. Good. There. Next slide, please. I think the next one is a picture of the hospice, except that it's mostly the housing estate that it's in. So yes, we can see people back the garden. So we'll move on, please, Mark, because it's quite a big picture. And so when I started here, nearly 17 years ago, they'd had a part-time chaplain who was a local vicar who came in and covered day hospice, inpatient unit, but the trustees at that point were some of the founder members. So they really wanted to get a full-time presence for a chaplain there, which was great. I'm not sure it would happen now, and when I retire, which I will in a couple of years' time, then I'm not sure what will happen then, we'll see. But their rationale for a full-time appointment were these points, really, to increase spiritual support for community patients. So a lot of my time is spent exploring the lanes of rural Somerset, which is great. It's very pretty out there. It's lovely. Getting lost, but finding patients' homes down strange little country lanes. To be a more visible, practical presence in the MDT. You can see that was the rationale. And hopefully, over the years, that rationale has been delivered. I have a volunteer base now. I've always had a volunteer team who are quite a broad church of thinking. We're not a very diverse community in Somerset. It has to be said. We are not a diverse community. We have contacts for local group and faith leaders, but in terms of our demographic, it's, I suppose our biggest community in Weston would be Greek Cypriots, probably. That's the sort of main sort of faith group. So, but not a diverse community. Okay, next one, please, Mark. So what I wanted us to do, after all that preamble about the place and my role, was to think about a particular patient and the way in which perhaps we can share our stories about how we deal with those who deny death, the difficult questions. I have full permission from Lisa's family to share this with you. So they were very, well, Ian, her husband, was very happy for the story to be shared. So just sort of clarifying that before we carry on. So Lisa, 42 years old, diagnosed with bowel cancer 18 months ago. Married to Ian, 2 children, Rosie, 8, who is profoundly disabled, and Reggie, who's a very lively 3-year-old. Her parents, Helen and Alan, live away, as does her sister Rachel. Lisa was a very capable senior marketing manager, top of the tree, high-flying lady, and described herself with these words: able, capable, energetic, an organiser of the family. That's how she saw herself, and she absolutely was. She coordinated all these facets of Rosie's care, which is considerable. She needs intensive care all the time. So she was very much the organiser of the household. Thank you, Mark. Next slide. So what happened? Well, 18 months ago, Lisa was diagnosed with this bowel cancer, and she had to have a very sudden and serious operation to remove tumours from her bowel. After that, you said it before, okay, so what happened was that due to the strong influence of Lisa's mum, Helen, she began on a course of alternative remedies. She was offered the usual sort of chemo and radiotherapy, but Helen was absolutely insistent, and Lisa took this on board, that what they would try were alternative remedies. So weird and wonderful things were sent off for, not complementary therapy, but alternative medicine, not alongside any mainstream treatment at all. So her first operation removed a large tumour. 6 months later, the same thing had to happen again. And following that operation, back to the alternative remedies. Another operation. Ian, her husband, told me that the third tumour was the size of a small football, and even then, no mainstream treatment. Much to his frustration, but we'll come on to that in a little while. Not surprisingly, Lisa suffered extreme symptoms of sickness, bowel obstruction, nausea, as you would expect, severe pain, as a result of which she was in and out of hospital for those 18 months, and finally was admitted to us at the hospice for end-of-life care in July this year. Can we just go back a minute, Mark, please? The admission was expected to be for terminal care because she was so very unwell, and there was no sense of anything sort of coming to her aid at that stage. Sorry, I thought we would be the first one. Next one, please. Yeah. Oh, sorry, no, back one. That's it. So what about my input here? Well, the first thing was Lisa agreed to a referral for chaplaincy and spiritual care. She welcomed that because she had an appreciation and an understanding of her spirituality. She wasn't a traditionally religious person, but she absolutely had spiritual beliefs, and our conversations unfolded that. She expressed concern on that first visit that I spent with her, sitting outside her room in our little private garden thing that's outside each patient's room, sitting in the sun, and while her body was wasting away, this woman had one of the most beautiful faces I think I've ever seen. Absolutely lovely, beautiful smile, whole face just lit up. And she looked relaxed and she was chilled and she was just relaxing in the sun. And she said she was already feeling, this is the day after she was admitted, a peace within her that she'd not experienced before. What she was able to talk about was her dismay, really, at her mother's continued insistence that there would be a miracle. That in spite of seeing her daughter wasting away, vomiting daily and copiously, seeing her in pain every day, there would be a miracle. And she said, I need my mum to be my mum. I need to be able to speak to her. And I need the support of her as my mother at this point, not someone who's trying to still hang on to a miracle, which she said she felt was slipping away. Because she too, had this sort of sense that, okay, anything's possible, it's going to happen. She talked about feeling relaxed in the hospice, having time to think about things, to gather her thoughts. She spoke of her beliefs, and she began to speak of her anger and her guilt and her sadness. Her anger that this was happening, that life had suddenly taken this trajectory that really she didn't want. Guilt at leaving her husband with 2 small children, particularly the care of Rosie, and also having insisted, she said, that they had a second child, and now she was leaving him to bear the brunt of this care, and obvious sadness. So here's my questions to you. I've spoken enough here. Chaplaincy role. What is our role here? What do we do? How do we begin an engagement with these patients? And we'll come to this miracle bit on and off through the story. But it would be, I've just flagged it up at this stage. How do we respond to that? So, with your patients, your palliative care patients, people who particularly ask to engage with you and have end-of-life conversations, how is it? How do you begin? What do you do?
Well, I guess the obvious this is that we don't set an agenda.
Sure.
We facilitate, we encourage them to share.
Absolutely.
That's basically what we start with.
Yes. Yeah. With no motivation, no agenda, as you say, just we're there. How do you introduce yourself?
Well, I wear a big yellow badge saying Jonathan.
Right.
Anyway, so
Yeah. With chaplain?
no, it doesn't say chaplain, but I do wear a clerical shirt.
Do you?
So,
Okay. Yes. Okay.
So
It's obvious.
Quite lots of things what I do. And I say I'm Jonathan, hospital chaplain. Where do I go from there?
Yeah.
Just
Wherever people want to go.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think going back to this morning, actually, that point that was made about not looking for a specific outcome,
Yes.
allowing
Yes.
things to develop.
Indeed.
It's a really helpful way of putting it.
Yeah. It really is, isn't it? Yeah. Sure. Ruth, did you want to answer?
Well, I was just thinking about how we let people express difficult emotions which they might not feel they can express to their loved ones.
Yeah.
So that would be honest.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
not say, oh no, you mustn't feel like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So whereas that's sounding more,
Oh.
but we might not believe them in that case. But
Yeah. But quite quickly, what happened with Lisa is that out it came.
yeah.
Out it came more, and this always surprises me, and it shouldn't these days because I've been around the block enough, but how quickly people are prepared to go very deeply with us if they feel it's safe. Jeff?
The spiritual healing that Mother was insisting on, was it? So it wasn't religious?
It wasn't, no, it wasn't.
Is your hospice NHS?
No,
Do you think that had it been NHS or was there any kind of safeguarding raised as in the course of the accepting the kind of group decision about not to engage with treatment?
yes, absolutely, that conversation was had on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And because, but because we had her husband very present with us, the conversations about treatment and what we were doing and we were trying to administer or hope to, Lisa herself had full capacity to refuse and chose to do so on a number of occasions.
The situation I had was a bit different in that I went into the room and a husband who'd come in to have his syringe driver topped up and then to go away again, was sat in the chair, very passive, didn't say very much, hello, but his wife was like, I expected him to die, and he's still alive. And I was so shocked.
Yes.
Because this was
Sure he was as well. Yeah.
And she would not engage,
Yeah.
and that was it.
Yeah.
From my perspective, I couldn't get anywhere.
Yeah.
But it was, I never found out whether he was accepting that he was dying. She certainly wasn't.
No, indeed. And was angry that he hadn't.
And then when, on the day that he did die in the hospital, I wasn't there because they didn't want me there. She kept saying to the staff, how long is it going to be?
Yeah.
When is it going to be? What time is it going to be?
Yeah.
Have I got time to go for a walk? It was control.
So quite rightly, sometimes our antennae are sort of sharp, aren't they, to some of these things? And certainly as regards to decision making around medication and undue influence, in a way, for Lisa's mum, we were very alert to it.
Did you meet her?
Yes, we'll come to that. Yes, yeah, it's unfolding, believe me. So that was the first encounter I had, and it was quite a long conversation. We sat outside, and this sort of outpouring happened, and we agreed that it was a good, it would be a useful relationship to keep going. She was happy to see me again and to sort of engage with these conversations, because it was this opportunity. It was as if she said, I feel I've got this space to get my head in order, whatever that meant to her. So it felt like we'd got some work to do, and was ready to do it. However, next slide, please.
Hang on.
Yeah. Yeah.
For just context,
Yeah.
your first encounter with Lisa, how many operations has she had at this point?
She's had the 3.
Okay.
She's had all 3, and now she's come to us for terminal care.
Okay.
Yeah. So no further treatment on offer.
Thank you. I think the question is that from the last slide,
Yeah.
I think the last question talks about how do we respond to
Miracles.
I think we've not discussed.
We haven't. No.
Let's ask the question. Okay.
I'm just dropping it in the pond at this stage.
Okay.
Keep it in mind, because we'll come to that. I think, just bear in mind that alongside all these conversations, there is talk of miracles. Okay. From Helen. So there we were, all ready to continue, and do you want to see me for a week? I'll put my head round the door. Okay, Lisa, do you want to talk? No, I'm all right. Okay, Lisa, do you want to talk? No, I'm all right. No. Oh, okay then. There we are. That's fine. And then, it was literally about a week later, she was out in the foyer of the hospice, looking at the various shop bits that we've got, and said, I've been looking for you, can we talk? So, just about to go home, actually. Yeah, of course we can. So, where should we go? Let's sit in the chapel. Unbeknown to me, for this whole week, she'd been making her way to the chapel, our quiet room, on a regular basis each day. And she'd sat and she'd written and she thought, and what she'd been doing was processing the conversation we'd had, and the conversation she'd had with other people as well, of course, in the meantime. She says, I like to come in here. It's quiet, it's away from that, by which she meant the beds, the ward, the reminder. It was a safe space. We had a young man with us before Christmas. He spent an awful lot of time in there. He was a Mormon, and that was really interesting for us to have somebody of his tradition sharing with us. He lit a lot of candles, and Lisa was doing the same. So we had to just keep the fire alarms checked and things in place, but they were able to do them safely, I hasten to add. So she requested this time, and we went into the chapel, and my word, in all my years, the conversation I had with her for about an hour was probably one of the most significant conversations I've ever had. She asked this question: what's it like to die? What have you seen? What have you witnessed? How do people do it? She wanted to talk about her own death. She talked about a death of a grandparent that she'd seen and said, she'd seen her grandfather reaching out. What was he reaching out for? What was that? What was going on? Was he seeing something? Does that happen? Do you see that? What are people doing then? She had questions about, she wanted to talk about her life and how she lived. She wanted to talk about expectancy of death and what happened afterwards. Now, people might have those conversations in bits and bobs, but this was all at once. And then, how do you die? And then it must be really hard for you, staff. It must be really hard for all of you, meeting these people, meeting us, getting to know us, and then we die. How is that for you? My word, didn't expect that. And at the end of that conversation, I said, it sounds as if you might be ready to think about planning for your funeral. And again, she said, yeah, I've been writing a few things down. So this was a big conversation, the sort that we have, but in the context of the hospice, with this young woman expecting her imminent death, in that context, it felt quite significant. So my questions for you, how do you approach? What's your response when people suddenly, you think you're just sort of having a bit of a chat, is everything all right, and then boom, you're down in the depths of the big questions. How is that for you? What do you do? How do you respond? And how then do we feel when patients withdraw for us? Because I was a bit miffed. I put my head on the door. Okay, silly. But thought, have I done something? Have I said something wrong? Have I taken the wrong tack here? I thought we were on that tack. Have I messed it up? And we might or may not want to think about good practice around funeral planning. That's a bit more of a practical thing. But certainly in terms of big questions and this withdrawing, any thoughts about that? What that's like?
I've been hospice chaplain for, I've got a bit of a cold, for about 13 years. And I thought, when I first started, I thought I'd get asked, what happens after death?
Yeah.
Is there life after? And I do get asked that. But I think the biggest question, or the question that people ask, is the one there. What's it like? What will it be like when I die?
Yeah.
Will I be in pain?
Yeah.
What are the signs of death and dying? And I always say, well, I think you need to ask a doctor.
Yes.
However, in my experience,
Yeah.
most people are not in pain at the end. People, they're dying when there are signs, the body shuts down, stop eating and drinking and so on. So, with those very practical medical questions that I didn't quite expect when I started. Although the big question is life after death. And when that comes, I always say, well, in my tradition as a Christian, I believe the Bible says this. So again, it's getting away from I believe this.
Yes.
It's more like, this is how I see what the Bible says about life after death. So,
What I heard coming through these questions was that I wondered about why she was asking. I was trying to attach the emotion and the feeling to the question, and it felt as if what I was hearing was fear and anxiety and apprehension, and all these things seemed to be behind it, as well as wondering, a very sort of inquisitiveness almost. Yeah, it was sort of interest. What's it going to be like? That's and what I did, what I shared with her was a conversation I'd had with a patient some time ago who was not scared of dying, but scared of being dead. And I'm not afraid to use that language with patients. I think it's really important. We're not talking about passing away or going to sleep or disappearing or whatever it is. We in hospices, we need to be able to use these words with sensitivity, but we need to be able to use them. And this patient was so scared because she said she had this image of, after she's died, standing in a doorway, opening the door and looking into a void of darkness. Nothing there. Nothing, no light, just dark. And she was so scared of stepping over the portal of this door into this darkness and being lost and alone. It was absolutely terrifying for her. And I shared that with Lisa and said, does that resonate with you? Are you scared about that void, or what's there for you? What are you thinking? If you imagine going through a door when you die, what do you see? She'd got grandparents and a dog lined up to be there, to be her welcoming committee. That's who she saw. But she said, what did you say to that patient? I said, well, she wasn't a person with a faith. So we talked about where she liked to be, and how about imagining, this is off the top of your head, isn't it, on a Wednesday evening or on a Wednesday afternoon. We talked about imagining a place that she found peaceful and comforting and restoring. And how about if you open that door, you see that view? What's that like? And I don't know, it seemed to help, but it felt, for that particular patient, that was quite a helpful way of anticipating and taking away some of the fear, rather than stepping into this darkness. And Lisa found that helpful as well. She said, oh, I can imagine that. I can imagine where I want to be. And those people are there, and the dog's on the beach, and it began to sort of soften that fear that I heard under her questions. I don't know, what do you make of that? Does that sound?
I think it's always good to explore where the question's coming from, that rather than feeling the temptation or almost the demand to bring some answer.
Yes.
Where, because we can hear it in different ways.
We can, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think I asked a patient asked me that question.
You're right.
And I said, do you mean, or does it like to die physically? Or any other way in which you're thinking?
Sure, yeah.
And they actually wanted to know the physical process.
Yes. Thank you. Jen, thank you.
This is very good. I'm going to try and have this conversation. I'm not sure that's particularly on my patients, but I've heard patients talk about near-death experiences. I'm sure not a lot of us have, where it's almost always, a positive thing. The light going into life. So I just want, to what extent would it be right to explore, transfer accounts of that experience to people who are perhaps further down the line?
Sure. I think wholly so, if people are asking, and because she'd witnessed her grandfather doing this reaching out, had I seen that? Yes, I have seen that, and we noticed that people do that, and whatever is going on is that mystery, which it's the mystery. My family say that's a cop-out, but I say it all the time because I haven't got any answer. But it's the mystery of it. Shall we go on to the next slide? Thanks, Caleb. Going on. So here we come to the family, and I think it was really apparent to staff that Helen would really, it would be useful for somebody to sit down and have some kind of honest conversation with her about miracles, medication, what's going on, what is it like for her, knowing that underneath all of this stuff that she was saying, she is losing her daughter. You know, in spite of all her beliefs about miracles and things, that there was a little voice in her head saying, your daughter's going to die, which was unbearable. Of course it was. You know, I have a daughter nearly Lisa's age, and the parallels were all too evident, really. So I sat with Helen in the garden again, because it was a nice day. We sat and I said, you know, how is this for you? What is it? What's happening in your heart and your head? And she spoke at length about these, you know, beliefs that she had and the hope that she didn't want to have taken away. And she was really worried that Lisa being in the hospital would take away Lisa's hope and her hope. And so we talked about what hope means and what it could mean for her. And so it was quite a useful conversation. It felt like she felt she'd been heard. Because I think some of the staff were so frustrated with the way that she was with them that she almost just needed time to be have her views validated a bit in some way, or at least to have that attention. And then I had this conversation with Ian, and this was on a Sunday afternoon. I was called in. It was a couple of days before Lisa died. I was called in because there was a bit of a bus stop, to put it mildly, between Helen and Ian. They had really argued, and Ian had walked off, he'd left, even though Lisa at that point was really looking so close to death. He'd had to leave the building. He couldn't tolerate being there because Helen and Helen's dad, who I've not really mentioned, Alan, who was a very steady, calm presence through this. Very steady, supporting his wife, but also supporting Lisa in a very different way. Talking to her about holidays they'd shared. Do you remember when we went to that caravan? I said, do you remember I used to take you fishing? And Lisa, apparently unresponsive, apart from little nods, he was just talking to her as a dad. He was doing what she, said my mum can't do. But I went in, and Ian had come back and was sort of pacing around. I said, shall we sit and do you want to sit and have a chat? And he spoke about how it had been from the beginning. And it was really helpful to hear, because he said at diagnosis, grade 4 bowel cancer, he knew Lisa was going to die. And had been very frustrated about her acceptance of these alternative remedies that became a real tension between him and Lisa and Helen. And he felt the 18 months they'd had of her being ill could have been so much better. That as a family, they could have done things, although Rosie is very poorly. It's Lisa's funeral tomorrow, and I'll be taking that. And I don't know whether Rosie will be there, because she and her mum, and this is quite shocking, like Ian said, they had a banter from the age of about 4. Who's going to die first? Is it you or me, Mummy? Well, not 4, because that was doing it, but the last couple of years they'd had this banter between them. That's quite shocking, really. But it was how they were with each other. And so Ian had been deeply frustrated at the expense of all this alternate stuff that had come into the house. The latest request was for £10,000 worth of little vials that she was to put under a pillow once a day for a month that would bring a cure. And she put his foot down and said, we haven't got that money and we're not going to spend it. But that was where it was going. So he'd been deeply frustrated that they had they'd wasted time. It could have been different. And then he said, perhaps what I found the most shocking thing, he said, it all goes back to when Lisa was first diagnosed. We had got a downstairs cloakroom in the house, and the toilet in the cloakroom wasn't working, it was blocked up. And what Helen had said was, if that hadn't happened, the emotional energy of, the emotional energy in the house that blockage caused, sympathetic magic was blocking the bell. Didn't know quite what to say to that. And he said, neither did he when she said it, but absolutely she believed that the emotional energy in the house had caused this illness in her daughter. And if that was better, if that was resolved, that even at that stage, 2 days before she died, she would be cured. So Helen sort of was quite off with me because I think she thought I might do a little bit of something. She'd insisted that Lisa had Reiki at least twice a week because that would do it. That would release this bad energy. A strange set of beliefs. But Ian, to his credit, was remarkably calm about that. And he said, I've just had to let them have these conversations. So that was a bit of a thing. So again, my questions. Just check the time. We're doing for time. Okay. How do chaplains support families? What's our role? And then, if you like, now's the time to have the conversation about the miracles. And is there conflict? I sort of felt, in a way, a bit of conflict here because I was involved with Lisa, although at that point she was unresponsive. My attention turned to the family. What's our learning? So that's the story. These are for me, some of the big questions. Our role when it gets complex and complicated with patients, and we're involved with families, as in hospices, we invariably are because we've got time to be, and we've become quite familiar with the visitors and who's looking as if it would be helpful to have a chat. But miracles and hope. Any thoughts?
Something I was thinking of in terms of the conflict of support with patient and families, things like people have different coping strategies to maybe have that hope of a miracle with some sort of coping strategy, if it's a maladaptive coping strategy for them. And we all, whether with the patients or the family, have different ways as individuals of going through that bereavement process and using different coping strategies to do that. And denial is part of that bereavement process.
Exactly.
And so people get stuck in that. So in some ways, supporting patient and family might involve different things and seeing their needs separately of what they need to do. Does that make sense?
No, it does indeed, and I wondered whether part of the whole miracle narrative of Helen was around this huge sadness and that this is going to happen and wanting to deny it. Back to what you were saying about
The interesting thing was I rang the hospice nurse and said, I've got a patient, I'm really concerned, they need support. And I'm sure they're known to you. As soon as I said the name, they said, we've offered everything. And they just refused. But I think what I found most upsetting was that the husband seemed to be silenced.
Yes, sure.
And he was the one dying.
Yeah.
I hope that that he was able to have a space.
It does.
But I don't know, because I don't know the whole.
no.
But it was interesting when I mentioned the name on the phone, they were like, oh yes, we know this. It is complicated.
It is.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's the patient themselves who deny it. We've got a young man at the moment with us, another 42-year-old, and I spoke to his mother on Monday, and she was saying that, you know, the difficulty is that he has a lot of things he has to sort out, practically. You know, bank things, business things, work things. He needs to sort these out. But it's this cause and effect. If he starts doing that, it means he's dying. And he wants to deny that with every fibre of his body. But he really hasn't got very long to do this. And if he doesn't, you know, some things it won't matter, it'll make it more complicated for those left behind. But if he chooses to take that route, well, we know what it's like when patients do the denying. The emotional pain, the spiritual pain is often heightened, therefore often the physical pain is greater, etc., etc. And that escalation.
Fallout on the staff.
Oh, indeed. And we haven't talked much about staff, but I mean, interesting with this situation, people were very angry with Lisa's mother. A lot of staff felt, you know, were very vocal in saying, and getting quite irate about it. And we talked about it as a team, really, and of course there was recognition that her daughter was dying, but a lot of staff just felt felt compassion for her, but they also felt that Ian was missing out on time with his wife.
In the conflict situation, I'm wondering if you feel you have a primary duty to be concerned for the well-being of the patient as against everybody else. So whether you have a duty, in some sense, to defend the patient's rights, spirituality, soul, whatever. So, and that might mean in some situations not being a peacemaker, but actually stirring up the conflict and saying, actually, you're wrong, you know, so-and-so would want this. Or I don't know, I can't remember words because that's a bit stronger. But, you know, is your role a peacemaker in a conflict, or is your role actually sometimes to say, stop that? No, you know, we need bloody advice here, actually.
Yes, I think sometimes it is. Yeah, we're not all soft and fluffy all the time, and shouldn't be. And with this particular Sunday, where Helen was absolutely resisting the team looking at increasing medication in her driver to give her some pain relief and to sort of ease the agitation that was really obvious. My role with Helen, was to say the team need to do what they need to do, and any conversation will be with Ian. Any decisions, or he will be the one who will be informed about increased Daslam or whatever it is they were putting in the driver. And she didn't, you know, she wasn't that keen, she didn't like it. But sometimes it's not about being liked.
I'm interested in Rosie, because you're painting a picture of Lisa and her mum rejecting traditional NHS-style evidence-based medicine. And there's this child in the picture that you alluded to as being actually really unwell and needing lots of medical support. And I'm just wondering what is going on there, because she's presumably, and you haven't said what's wrong with her, and we don't really need to go into that, there's a different question, but she's got lots of medical stuff going on that the family may not have consented to, but they are supporting, and it's happening in their presence. And I wonder how that played into the decisions around Lisa's treatment, and whether there's something in the background about maybe Rosie shouldn't be still alive, or how we keep Rosie alive, that is playing into the treatment of Lisa.
Yeah, indeed. And Ian spoke about this on this particular day when we were having the toilet block conversation. He said, and the thing is that Helen's applying the same thing to Rosie. That there is,
but was Lisa, because
Lisa
was allowing for herself, but but not for Rosie.
No, Rosie had regular treatment, yeah. But, but there was that sort of expectation that there was some kind of emotional block in her that needed to be shifted. And this little girl, who hasn't got long to live, and that's desperately sad. She used to come in her little wheelchair and sort of motorise in, zoom around the place and ready hurtling around. And, you know, it was great that they came in and were very comfortable in the setting. And but at the same time for the staff, it was challenging, to say the least.
Is there going to be ongoing support for Helen?
They live away, so
Have some contact.
we will, and
Because she'd have lost a daughter and a grand.
indeed. So what we've talked about is being able to link them in with support where they live, and I think they'll take that up.
Just thinking about how you sort of what you do with this idea of Helen's spirituality and how you respond to in a sense, those demands for miracles and things, and using a bit of psychology and research on well-being and relationship to spirituality and religion. The research says that, you know, a faith that's really sort of rooted in religion is better for our mental health, our well-being, than some nebulous, not undefined, eclectic spirituality.
Sure, yeah.
And maybe there's, because that seems to be where Helen is. She's sort of putting it shores
Absolutely,
and trying to, and got some vague ideas. But maybe there's something about coming to a place of actually what ultimately, you know, this is case study and she's done already, but what ultimately would Helen want and the family want and would Lisa want from her, which ultimately maybe everyone could agree is peace. And that and you can authentically speak from your own faith background into that, can't you? Because I guess you can't authentically speak into her spirituality, but you can authentically speak into something that you know is good and life-giving.
Absolutely.
So then sort of moving into something that's a bit more grounded and solid, and doesn't exclude the idea of miracle. Maybe it broadens the idea of miracle.
Absolutely. And that definition of what's meant by miracle, what's meant by healing. And if we pray for, what any of us would, how we define both either of those terms, it didn't feel. So when Helen asked me to say some prayers with Lisa, I chose not to use the word miracle or healing, but we talked about peace and acceptance and using other words, because I couldn't collude with what I felt Helen was defining as a miracle. And I would say miracles do happen because people settle and find peace, but she didn't want to hear that bit. There was no sense that was really what she meant by it. It was. So
I was thinking about the whole issue of miracles, even within a religious background, because there's a struggle sometimes within some traditions of faith to think that you have to keep praying for miracle and peace until the end. You're supposed to pray for people to get better, not accept they're going to die until it actually happens. And I think sometimes some faith communities can really struggle with
absolutely.
that whole issue.
Absolutely. Yeah. And certainly patients I've thought of, I can think of over the years, who've perhaps belonged to perhaps a more dogmatic sort of tradition.
Yes,
who says, for goodness sake, my church is still praying for me to get better. I'm dying, and had to put on a mask for the church and for the visiting minister, because they wanted us to sort of keep that going. And for goodness sake, I'm dying. Can they just pray that I die peacefully? You know, and die well. Well, that's what I want them to pray for, not for me to get better. I'm not getting better, it's all right. So, yeah, there's a conflict sometimes.
I've got a situation going on at the moment in this respect, and a member of staff in my hospital, one of my hospitals, was diagnosed with cancer about 18 months ago and is getting quite ill now. Still working at the moment, but is quite ill. She's referred to me by her line manager. She has declined any treatment so far on the basis that the Bible tells her she will be healed.
Oh gosh, right.
Even if she went for medical treatment, she doesn't like the idea that she might be treated, it might go well, she might be in remission, but then would always be under a kind of almost a sentence, if you like, in returning. That was the tricky one to argue about. I wasn't going to argue with her, but we had a phone conversation, and she did ask me what my view was about her feelings about healing.
Gosh,
So we did have a conversation, but it was on the phone, it wasn't really, you know, it wasn't an appropriate sort of situation to have that conversation. We are going to be meeting probably next week or the week after when she recovers from COVID.
right.
So I'm sort of already, and you know, somebody mentioned about do we side with the patient in that respect and understand and sympathise with their views, or do we challenge and say, look, there is an alternative? I don't know what my thinking is.
No, you're really going to have to be led by the moment, I think.
And I'm also a bit concerned about who else there is in the equation here. Is she being influenced or not? Or I don't know. There's a lot I don't know.
Exactly, you need a bit of finding out.
That's the thing that I was thinking I want to explore. Who else is there? Who's it affect, you know? Who else is there in your life? And either then that could go either way, you know, all these people and they desperately always have all this treatment, or all these people are there telling them I shouldn't have it, and then to bring it back to what do you want deep down.
How confident she is to say no and why.
See, I
There's
was
a lot more I need to know.
There is.
So there's a ripple effect here. I mean, it really upset her line. And then there's probably also
It's quite shocking.
in her team as well.
Well, of course she'll have treatment, of course she will.
She's good, she's clear, she understands.
Yes, of course she will.
You would think.
I was thinking of an overlap, because within mental health services, I'm in mental health service, we talk about in relation to the Mental Health Capacity Act. Have people got the capacity to make a decision, and if they have, then we support them. So in the sense of a patient and family, we should be supporting the patient's capacity. And there's always going to be influences on their life. All of our lives are not in a bubble without any subjective things influencing it, but at the same time supporting the capacity that patients to lead the way things go.
People have the right to make what others consider unwise decisions. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I've been involved in these types of conversations many times, and some of the hardest ones are with people who it's in their tradition, where healing is expected to hope for. What I try to do gently is give an acceptable alternative to healing, and to try and gently introduce a theology of death without using those terms. And the easiest way, if they share a Christian faith, I point them to Psalm 116, 50. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his faithful servants. Whether in life or whether in death, you're still precious. God's attitude to you doesn't alter. And that just gives permission for, or starts to give permission for death to be an acceptable outcome in that area. And I find that helpful in many conversations.
Thank you. So that's Psalm 116.
160
Just for the The verse 15.
100, Psalm 116, verse 15.
Thank you.
I kind of use the words from Romans a bit like that when it talks about there's nothing in life or death can separate us from the love of God, as a way that the isolation and the loneliness is kind of gently considered removed. That's certainly for people who faith. But that's taking up with you on your own. And you're the person you love, isn't it?
And going back to the lady I said who was looking into this door and thinking, I'll be on my own then in my death. And how terrifying that was for him. That seems to what people are feeling.
A bit like Jonathan, I wear my coat and go around. And I always start every conversation with the same statement and end every visit with the same statement. So I'll say, I am Peter, I'm the chaplain, I just wanted to say hello. Is there anything we'd like to talk about? And even while the chaplain, we don't need to talk about God or faith, we talk about anything. And then some people will talk about God or faith, and a lot of people won't talk about God or faith, we'll talk about anything. But I always end the conversation with, before I go, is there anything you'd like me to do for you? Now, some people look at the water jug and the cup and say, could you just fill that? Which is fine. I do that. And other people will say, yeah, can we pray? And give you a blessing? Very rarely will I offer to pray, unless I think it's right.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
And,
Welcome and stuff.
sorry about this cough, this voice. And, excuse me. And I never pray for a healing unless they ask me to. So if they, and again, in the 13 years I've been there, I can count on one hand the amount of people have actually said, can you pray that I'll be healed?
Yeah, sure.
And I never get into debate. The dying, I never go into, ultimate healing comes through death. It's none of that. It's that hope. And I think, right, this is their hope. They've asked me, I've asked them, is there anything they want me to do? They've asked me to pray that they'll be healed. And I pray that their days will be lengthened and they will experience God's healing as well.
We find ways of doing that that's kind of acceptable to ourselves as well, don't we? I just want to could we have the next slide? Hello? Can I have the next slide? Just the so just let's round the story off really. So we've had the weekend, we've had the conflict, significant conversation. Lisa died with a member of staff. The family had kept, Helen and Alan had kept vigil, and she died in about 8 o'clock one morning. They'd gone home in the early hours. Ian had said his goodbyes. He said, I don't have to be there. I've got to be at home with the children. That's where that's where I've got to be. And she died with a member of staff, a nurse who she'd had a particularly good relationship with. And it was just right, so that nobody was able to say, well, I was there, and I'm really not, I'm sorry if I'm presenting Helen as the big bad wolf here, I'm really not intending to, but it was a challenge to work with them, but that's what we do, isn't it? But I thought we all thought it was quite interesting that we felt she chose to die then, and that was okay. And tomorrow we'll have a funeral, which was going to be led. Ian was taking on responsibility for planning it. I was away, came back, it all changed. It's Helen and Alan taking responsibility. We've had conversations around this, so we'll see what happens tomorrow. But it will be okay. It will be okay. And the next one, please. Just the last. I think this is the last one. So yeah, I mean, as ever, these sessions raise more questions than we have answers for, and sorry about that. But I thought the threading through of a case study just brought about the complexity of all our roles in it, wherever we work. But when death and dying is a constant focus, it's it's quite a challenge. It was a challenge for faith and belief perspectives. A lot of staff had got some very thoughtful responses to what was being said. We've had so many young patients. We've had so many young patients meeting untimely deaths over the last 2 years, and you know about that only too well. But people suddenly and shockingly being told it's 6 weeks, it's 3 months, it's whatever, and coming to our doors unprepared, but very quickly in palliative care. And the challenge for our staff remains ongoing, but you know well what that's like in acute settings as well. And it's brought about, you know, ongoing discussion with staff about faith and beliefs and, you know, that loony woman. Well, no, she wasn't. She was a mum with a view, and she was a mum losing a daughter. And but that's how some staff chose to respond to her. And these are questions that are ongoing, aren't they? Really, what value do we bring into the mix of these situations? What's possible because we're there? And, you know, we're always learning, aren't we? Always learning. And there are some people who sit on our shoulders who don't quite disappear, and she would be one of them for me, I think. As, you know, we're reflecting on what we learn from one another, what we learn from our patients and their families and one another.
So just thinking about the impact, the personal impact
Yeah.
on you or,
Yeah.
you know, on each of
Yeah.
us when we're
Yeah.
alongside these people.
Yeah.
And it does, you know, it forces us to look at our own mortality.
Indeed.
Or our loved ones' mortality.
Indeed.
And,
Yeah. Sure.
You know, these core beliefs ourselves.
Yeah, sure.
It changes us.
It does, and it changes the way we look at our own beliefs, I think. You know, I would say that I've got a core of things that I hold on to in my own beliefs, but there's a big mass around that core that's constantly being shaped by conversations and situations like this. I think that's a really healthy thing. Personally, it's kept me fresh to be able to do the work for a long time. But the way, the questions people ask of us, the challenges they bring to us, gosh, it just makes you realise there's no easy answer. And as I said, it's a mystery. Well, yeah, that's the point.
That's just to be honest. I'm doing some research about hope, and it always strikes me that all through our lives we're perfectly entitled to have unrealistic hopes.
Yes.
Right up until we're dying,
Yeah.
and then everybody hopes that our hopes will come forever. All of a sudden, we get value judged for them, whereas my hopes now about what might happen to me tomorrow, that's fine. But it is great. Why should it be unrealistic?
Yeah.
When you die.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we just
Yeah.
do value judgment.
We do.
Whereas our role is to try and make sure that people understand
Yeah.
maybe what the decision they're
Sure.
making. As long as that's okay.
Yeah, quite.
Then
And I think, ultimately, as I said before, I think Helen's main fear of our involvement as a team was that we were going to take hope away, and that there would be no hope left in that room. And she was very fixed about what that meant and how that would be.
This is my point. In this story, all already mentioned. Do you have for your well-being?
Yes.
Do you have your own supervision? Because
I do.
in
Yes.
this story, if we don't have our own personal well-being, we are not going to give to the other people.
No,
And the other
absolutely.
way around,
Yeah.
for the staff. That's your responsibility for the staff,
Yeah.
also those who have spent some time with
Yes.
the staff, also the debriefing.
Sure.
So that is also in this story what we do. In the acute hospital, we are differently. Sometimes we are only informed the care team, CNS just arrived. So and so is just left, and we encounter with a relative.
Yep.
A lot of encounter with a relative, not with a patient. And my colleague always say, why they come at the last minute, why they come. But in the hospice, you have more time.
We do, and that's the difference, that we have concentrated time with, and it may feel like a luxury to you working in acute care, but it's different. It's focused, it's intense, it's challenging in a very different way, I think, but you know, a lot of what I'm sharing here will translate into your experience, I'm sure. It's just a different setting, and we have the time to do, you know, to sit for an hour with a patient, and it's, yeah, and we have the time. But absolutely, supervision, hurrah. So thank you for being here and for sharing conversation, and, you know, I hope that you can take something away from this. I think the slides will be, I'll send them to Mark, and they will be available if they're of any value going forward. Thank you.